What about smuggling, human smuggling?
This is something that is a broad phenomenon across amongst the refugees, and everybody's talking about it. How can they get out? Because they're in this waiting game in Syria. They can't work. They're running out of money. Desperation is rising. And I met actually one of their neighbors, a young man who was 19 years old, and he was paying a smuggler $9,000 to, he was going to go back into Iraq, go through northern Iraq, into Turkey, walk through the mountains, and go to Greece. And it was his second attempt. The first one, he'd been arrested and jailed in Greece, and the smuggler had run off. One of the things that's happening with the human trafficking as well is that there's a great deal of, obviously, corruption. People that believe that they're going to get documents or that end up giving money to somebody, and I know someone who parted with $26,000 and the smuggler ran away. So this is their life savings. You have seen most of the Iraqis that are arriving in Sweden are coming through human trafficking networks. There's attempts to stop them, but there's a lot of desperation. And a lot of people are being smuggled out so that they can go to university abroad, so that they can establish a life. It's not simply to commit some kind of illegal act.
I want to ask you about a man named Sif, but we have to break. Deborah Campbell, our guest, independent journalist, she spent 2 months embedded with the refugees from Iraq and Syria and wrote a piece for Harper's called Exodus, Where Will Iraq Go Next? Stay with us.
طالعة من بيت أبوها رايحة البيت الجيران فاطمة سلم علي يمكن الحيل زعلان طالعة من بيت أبوها رايحة البيت الجيران فاطمة سلم علي يمكن الحيل زعلان قلت لها يا حلوة رويني وعطشان مية يسقيني قلت لها يا حلوة رويني عطشان مية يسقيني وقالت لي روح يا مسكيني وقالت لي روح يا مسكيني مينا ما تروي العطشان طالع من بيت أبوها رايحة البيت الجيران فاطمة سلم علي
Amir Taufik here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Our guest, independent journalist Deborah Campbell, spent several months with Iraqi refugees in Syria. Deborah, I wanted you to talk about what happened to the family of Saif, the former intelligence officer. We have photographs of his wife and 9-year-old daughter, Asma. And for our listening audience, you can go to our website at democracynow.org to watch or look at these photos.
Right. Asma is a 9-year-old girl, and 2.5 years ago, the farmhouse where she lived with her father and mother in Baghdad was hit by rocket-propelled grenades by the Badr Brigade. This is a militia that's very close to the current Shia government. It's also involved in the fighting currently going on in Basra at this moment, the fight for power that's coming down right now. And at this point, her older sister was killed. She herself was badly burned, and her mother suffered a stroke that paralyzed half her body. So she's pushing herself up in the picture, but she had been lying on a mat in their one-bedroom apartment in Damascus for the last 2 years. No medical care has come for either the mother or the daughter. And her older brother was taken and tortured, so now the techniques that were used have made it so that he doesn't speak well, and they have to keep him drugged or he becomes violent. So this is the situation that this family is living in at this moment. And the youngest, Asma, hasn't been to school. She's had no education, also because the family's living in Syria illegally. They haven't wanted to make people aware of their presence because he believes that the Iraqi militias will kidnap him, and that they will be paid for this service. So he's living in hiding, and she's received not only no medical care, but isn't going to school. One of the things that really struck me about the refugee crisis is the way Iraq had once been, before the war, the most educated country in the Middle East. And all of these children that I met, not only her, but those living legally in Syria, were in school before the war. And now 70 to 90% of those in Syria are not in school, although the Syrian government is allowing them. Syrian schools now have 60, 70 children per classroom. If you don't have documents, and if you're fleeing with 24 hours notice, you're not going and getting your children's report cards before you leave, or they've missed 3-4 years already, and they don't go to school. And many of them are starting to work now to support their families, whether shining shoes or selling things in the street.
I want to play parts in an interview with a young Iraqi translator named Ahmed, who used to work with the American forces. Introduce us, Deborah.
Ahmed is 32 years old. He worked with the Army and Marines in Fallujah, and he's currently also living in hiding in Syria.
I get threats from unknown people. They came to my families asking, they just ask them, you have a guy working with USA Cultural Forces, you have to tell him to stop this job, to stop this work, because it is very dangerous for him. Yeah, that's what made me quit. Actually, I was very afraid as my work as translator. It is very dangerous to work as translator, and especially if the guys or the people around you, I mean your relatives or your friends, everybody know that I'm translator. That will be very dangerous. 2 days ago, I get a phone about my friend. He was working translator before in 2004, but he quit from a long time. And they told me he was killed in front of his house, about 20 meters from his house. He was killed, and this is very sad thing happened to me. I don't ask about. I don't insist to go to US, or I don't choose specifically a specific country. I just want to be in a safe place and living in a peace. That's all what I need. No more else.
Ahmed was interviewed by Deborah Campbell and former Democracy Now! Producer Jen Hughes in Syria. What has happened to him since then, Deborah?
Well, this is a little bit of a good news story. Right now, very few Iraqis are finding places abroad to be resettled. But he, shortly after this interview, got his phone call, and he's gone through 6 rounds of interviews over the past 16 months, and finally has been accepted for resettlement in the United States. So he's just waiting for that to go through, but it looks positive, unlike the situation for a lot of Iraqis.
So let's talk about the situation here in this country. Congressman Dana Rohrabacher of California, Republican, said, I don't think it's the time that we should be accelerating our refugee efforts. Now is the time we should be calling on the refugees from Iraq to go home.
Well, I think we've seen the clips from Basra, and we know what home looks like. The majority of Iraqis said to me that they can never go home. Even there were less than 50,000 that went home at the end of last year during this great story about how Iraqis were going home to peace and stability. Even that small number of people that went back said that they did so because they'd run out of money and because Syria had stopped renewing their residency permits. So the majority say that they may never be able to go back to Iraq, and they're facing death if they do so.
What's the material support ban here?
Well, after 9/11, this is legislation that was expanded after 9/11, such that those refugees that are going for interviews to be resettled, and they have claims and so forth. The material support ban essentially means that any refugee that has assisted terrorists is denied entry into the United States. That makes a lot of sense. How it's being interpreted, however, is that any refugee that has paid ransom to a kidnapper who's on the list of terrorist organizations is considered then to have materially supported terrorists, and you won't meet very many Iraqis who haven't had a family member or friend kidnapped that they've had to ransom in some way. Now, the material support ban is so broadly interpreted that one senior United Nations official told me that even if a woman has been kidnapped and sexually assaulted by one of these groups and she's forced to cook for them, this is considered giving material support to terrorists.
This point, for Iraqi refugees, they're blocked from going to Syria, Jordan, and where else?
Everywhere else. There is no exit. However, in January, there was one report that 1,200 a day were still leaving Iraq from Syria. How they're doing so, I'm really not sure. Whether they're finding their own way in at this point. You're seeing, as one diplomat said to me, mortar finds cracks to flow into. When people are desperate, Iraqis will do anything to get out.
Well, Deborah Campbell, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Deborah Campbell, independent journalist and author, spent 2 months embedded with Iraqi refugees in Syria, wrote a piece in the latest Harper's Magazine called Exodus, Where Will Iraq Go Next? This is Democracy Now!, Democracy Now!